I still remember the exact words my father said as he threw my duffel bag onto our front lawn. Your sister deserves the future, not you. I was 19, shivering with pneumonia, my college fund suddenly gone. That night, I slept in my old Honda Civic, coughing until my chest ached, unable to process how my own parents could discard me like yesterday's trash. I had no idea that 5 years later, my sister Amanda would walk into my office, resume in hand, completely unaware I would be her interviewer. The look on her face when I said, "We are here to discuss your qualifications," is something I will never forget. I grew up in Westerville, Ohio, a typical middle-class suburb with neat lawns and good schools. My parents, Richard and Diane, seemed like normal, loving people. Dad worked as an accountant at a respected local firm, and Mom taught 3rd grade at the elementary school. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, complete with a golden retriever named Cooper and annual summer trips to Lake Erie. But beneath that picture-perfect facade, there was always an imbalance that I tried to ignore. My sister Amanda arrived when I was 3 years old, and from the beginning, she was treated differently. While I was loved, she was adored. Where I received congratulations for achievements, she received extravagant celebrations. When I won the 6th grade science fair with a project on renewable energy, my parents nodded and said, "Good job." 3 years later, when Amanda placed 3rd with her baking soda volcano, they took her out for an expensive dinner and bought her a new bike. I told myself this was normal, that younger siblings always got special treatment, but deep down I knew something was off. Throughout high school, I worked hard, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while holding down a part-time job at the local hardware store. Every dollar I earned went into my college fund, which my parents had started when I was born. They promised to match what I saved, and I believed them. I dreamed of becoming an architect, sketching building designs in notebooks that filled my bookshelf. Amanda, meanwhile, breezed through school on natural talent and charm. She joined every club that caught her interest and quit just as easily when she got bored. My parents never pushed her to get a job or save money. "Your sister needs to focus on her potential," my mother would say whenever I pointed out the discrepancy. I was ecstatic when I got accepted to Ohio State University. It wasn't Ivy League, but it had a solid architecture program, and with my savings combined with what my parents promised, I could graduate debt-free. I moved into the dorms in September, feeling like my life was finally beginning. 3 months into my freshman year, I caught pneumonia. It hit me hard and fast, leaving me bedridden with a fever that wouldn't break. My roommate drove me to the hospital when I started coughing blood. The doctor said I needed bed rest and prescribed antibiotics that made me dizzy and nauseated. I had to withdraw for the semester, losing my housing in the process. When I called my parents, explaining that I needed to come home to recover for a few months, there was a long silence on the line. Then my father said, "We need to talk when you get here." Something in his tone sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my fever. I arrived home, weak and exhausted, to find my mother crying in the kitchen and my father sitting stiffly at the dining table. They sat me down and explained that they had made a difficult family decision. Amanda had been offered early acceptance to Princeton, her dream school, but even with a partial scholarship, they couldn't afford the tuition. "We've decided to use your college fund for Amanda's education," my father said, as if discussing a business transaction. "She has a real shot at greatness, Stephen. You can take out loans or go to community college." I stared at them in disbelief. "But that's my money too. I saved half of it." My father shook his head. "The account is in our names. Legally, it's our decision." That was the first blow. The second came when I discovered they had been siphoning money from my fund for years, slowly building Amanda's while letting me believe mine was growing with my contributions. Bank statements I found while searching for my birth certificate showed regular transfers dating back to when I was 16, right around the time Amanda started talking about Princeton. I confronted them that evening, my hands shaking as I held the printed statements. My mother couldn't meet my eyes. My father's face hardened. "You've always been practical, Stephen. You'll land on your feet," he said dismissively. "Amanda needs this opportunity more than you do." The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. My entire childhood reframed itself in my mind, every unequal treatment now seen for what it was, preparation for this moment when they would choose her future over mine. The full confrontation happened the next morning. I'd spent a restless night coughing and planning what to say. I walked downstairs to find them already at the table, an envelope between them. "We think it's best if you find your own place," my father said without preamble. "I'm sick," I protested, my voice raspy. "I need a few weeks to recover and find a job." "We've given it a lot of thought," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. She pushed the envelope toward me. "There's $300 in there. It's all we can spare right now." "All you can spare?" I echoed, incredulous. "You've taken thousands from me." "That was always our money," my father snapped. "And watch your tone. This isn't easy for us either." "Not easy? You're throwing your sick son out in January. Where am I supposed to go?" My father stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "Your sister deserves the future, not you. She has real potential. You're just ordinary, Stephen. You'll survive." Those words burned into my memory. Ordinary, dispensable. I looked at my mother, hoping for intervention, but she just dabbed at her eyes and said nothing. "Your things are packed," my father continued. "I need you gone by noon." Sure enough, when I went upstairs, I found most of my belongings stuffed into 2 duffel bags and a few boxes, 19 years reduced to what could fit in my Honda Civic. I was too shocked, too ill to fight. I loaded my car in a daze, each trip up and down the stairs leaving me winded and dizzy. As I carried the last box out, I saw Amanda standing in the doorway of her room, watching me with wide eyes. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Ask them," I replied, too hurt to explain. I never said goodbye. My father watched from the window as I pulled away from the only home I'd ever known, into a future suddenly turned uncertain and frightening. That first night in my car was the lowest point of my life. I parked behind a 24-hour Walmart, huddled under the one blanket I had brought, alternating between fever chills and coughing fits that left me gasping. I kept thinking my parents would call, that they would realize what they'd done, and ask me to come back. My phone remained silent. In the morning, I used the Walmart bathroom to wash up as best I could. I looked terrible, pale and sweaty. An elderly employee gave me a concerned look but didn't say anything. I spent the $300 quickly, a cheap motel for 2 nights to get out of the cold, food, more medicine. By the 4th day, I was back in my car, no better health-wise, and now nearly broke. I called my Uncle Jeff, my father's brother, hoping for help. The conversation was brief and devastating. "Your dad told me about your drug problem, Stephen," he said, his voice cold. "I can't have that influence around my kids. Get clean, then we can talk." "Drug problem?" I was stunned into silence. After that call, I tried my mother's sister, then my grandparents. Each conversation revealed the same thing. My parents had told everyone I had developed an addiction at college and had chosen to leave rather than follow their rules. They had not only cast me out, but had poisoned my entire support system against me. 2 friends from high school let me crash on their couches for a few days each, but they were college students themselves, living in crowded apartments with roommates who quickly grew tired of an extra person taking up space. By the end of January, I was officially homeless, still sick, and completely alone. My car became my shelter, my college textbooks my pillows. I haunted public libraries during the day for warmth and used their bathrooms to stay somewhat clean. Fast food restaurants became my lifeline, not just for cheap meals but for the free Wi-Fi to search for jobs and housing I couldn't afford. I tried calling my sister, hoping she might at least tell me why this was happening, but she never picked up. Later, I discovered my parents had told her I wanted nothing to do with the family anymore, that I was jealous of her success and had left in a rage. The final blow came in early February when my car was towed from the street where I'd parked it overnight. I didn't have the $150 to get it back, losing not just my shelter but most of my remaining possessions. That night, I checked into a homeless shelter downtown, the reality of my situation impossible to deny any longer. The shelter was crowded, noisy, and sometimes dangerous. My laptop disappeared the first night, stolen while I slept fitfully on a narrow cot. With each passing day, my anger at my parents grew, but so did my despair. I wasn't getting better, my pneumonia lingering without proper rest or nutrition. I applied for jobs, but who would hire someone with no address who looked like death warmed over? As February turned to March, I found myself sitting in a small park, watching people walk by, living their normal lives. I had 27 cents in my pocket. No home, no car, no computer, no family. I was seriously contemplating whether life was worth continuing when a gruff voice interrupted my dark thoughts. "You look like you could use a hot meal, son." I looked up to see an older man, probably in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that somehow remained sharp and observant. He wasn't dressed much better than I was, but he carried himself with dignity. I was too exhausted to refuse. That chance encounter would change everything. The man introduced himself as Jack Parker, and he bought me lunch at a nearby diner. I devoured the first real meal I'd had in weeks while he watched patiently. When I finally slowed down, he asked me my story. Maybe it was the food, or maybe it was just having someone actually listen, but everything poured out of me. My parents, the betrayal, the illness that wouldn't go away, the weeks of homelessness. When I finished, I expected judgment or dismissal. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "I've heard worse stories, but not many," he said. "How's that cough?" As if on cue, I started hacking, pain shooting through my chest. When I caught my breath, he was already standing. "Come on," he said. "I know someone who can help with that." I followed him, having nothing to lose. We walked several blocks to a small medical clinic I hadn't known existed. Jack spoke briefly to the receptionist, who nodded and led us back to an exam room without asking for ID or insurance. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, examined me thoroughly and shook her head. "Your pneumonia is becoming chronic. You need consistent treatment and rest." She wrote several prescriptions, which Jack took without comment. Later, sitting on a bench outside a pharmacy with my new medications in hand, I finally asked the question, "Why are you helping me?" Jack sighed, looking suddenly much older. "Let's just say I'm making up for past mistakes." Over the next few days, I learned Jack's story in pieces. He had been a successful business executive decades ago, rising through corporate ranks while his family took a back seat to his ambition. When his wife finally left, taking their 2 children, he threw himself even deeper into work. By the time he realized what he'd lost, it was too late. His children wanted nothing to do with him. I retired wealthy and alone. He told me one evening as we shared a simple dinner in his small apartment, where he'd let me sleep on the couch. Then the 2008 crash wiped out most of what I had. Poetic justice, maybe. He wasn't destitute, but he lived modestly now, doing occasional business consulting for small companies who valued his experience. A week after we met, Jack made me an offer. "I need help organizing my paperwork, making calls, sending emails. I can't pay much, but you can stay here, and I'll help you get back on your feet." It was more generosity than I'd seen in months. I accepted immediately. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but it evolved into something more. As my health improved with proper medication and regular meals, I started taking on more responsibilities. Jack's occasional consulting was actually a small business he ran from his home office, advising struggling companies on restructuring and efficiency. I had a knack for the administrative side, organizing his chaotic files and setting up a proper billing system. Soon I was sitting in on client calls, taking notes and offering insights that Jack actually valued. One evening, about 2 months after we met, Jack had a coughing fit that wouldn't stop. I recognized the sound, the way he clutched his chest. I called an ambulance despite his protests. At the hospital, while we waited for test results, he finally told me the truth. Cancer. Stage 4. Lungs and liver. He said it matter-of-factly, diagnosed 6 months ago. Doctors gave me a year, maybe less. I was stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Didn't want your pity," he said simply. "Besides, helping you has been good for me, gives me purpose." Jack recovered enough to return home, but the episode changed our relationship. There was an urgency now to everything he taught me about business, finance, and people. He wasn't just giving me a job, he was passing on everything he knew. "You're smart, Stephen," he told me. Smarter than I was at your age. But you need credentials in this world. We're getting you back to school. He helped me enroll in community college, paying my tuition from his savings despite my protests. I took business classes in the evenings while managing his consulting work during the day. Every dollar I earned went into a new savings account he insisted I open. Your parents stole your future, he said. We're building you a new one. As summer turned to fall, Jack's health deteriorated rapidly. Between hospital visits, he introduced me to his contacts, people who owed him favors or respected his judgment. This is Stephen, he would say. He's the future of my business. Trust him as you would me. One rainy October night, after I'd completed a complex proposal for a new client entirely on my own, Jack handed me a folder. I've been doing some digging, he said, his voice weaker than it had been that morning. About your parents. Inside was a detailed report on my father's accounting firm, including evidence of tax irregularities and possible fraud going back years. I have friends in interesting places, Jack explained. Your father's been cutting corners. Nothing that would send him to prison, probably, but enough to ruin his reputation if it got out. I stared at the documents, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted revenge, to expose my father and watch his carefully constructed life crumble as mine had. Another part recoiled from becoming as calculating and cruel as he had been. Jack seemed to read my thoughts. I'm not suggesting you use this, he said. Just know that people who hurt others often have their own secrets. Knowledge is power, Stephen. What you do with it defines you. I put the folder away, not ready to decide. 2 weeks later, Jack was admitted to hospice care. I spent every moment I could at his bedside, watching the man who had saved my life slowly slip away. Before he died, he made a final confession. I changed my will, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Left you everything. It's not much anymore, but it's a start. The client list is gold, though. Don't squander it. I held his hand, tears streaming down my face. Why me? You barely knew me. He smiled faintly. Sometimes the family you choose matters more than the one you're born to. His eyes, still sharp despite his failing body, held mine. Promise me you'll build something good. I promise, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. Jack Parker died peacefully that night. I was the only one at his funeral, held at a small chapel with just the minister and myself. I stood by his grave long after the service ended, thinking about how this stranger had become more family to me in 8 months than my biological parents had been in 19 years. I returned to the apartment, now legally mine according to his will, and opened my laptop. Jack had left me $32,000, his client list, and something even more valuable, a future I could believe in. Jack's passing left a hole in my life, but also a foundation I could build upon. I moved to a smaller, more affordable apartment, investing the money he left me carefully. His client list became my lifeline, though I lost a few who had worked with Jack personally. Most stayed, impressed by the systems we had put in place and my dedication to continuing his level of service. I threw myself into my community college courses, no longer just going through the motions but genuinely engaging with the material. Business management fascinated me, the intricacies of organizational behavior and strategic planning challenging my mind in ways architecture never had. While the consulting work provided enough income to live on, I knew I needed more formal education to truly advance. I applied for every scholarship available, wrote countless essays about overcoming adversity, and maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. The trauma of my family's betrayal lingered. I had panic attacks that would wake me gasping in the middle of the night. Certain triggers, like seeing a family having dinner together through a restaurant window, could send me into a spiral of depression that lasted days. On the recommendation of one of my professors, I started seeing a therapist at the community college's free clinic. Dr. Myers was a straight-talking woman in her 50s who didn't offer pity, just practical strategies and honest insights. What your parents did was inexcusable, she told me in our first session. But letting that define your future gives them power they don't deserve. Slowly, session by session, I learned to process my anger and betrayal without letting it consume me. I still had no contact with my family, though occasionally I would look at Amanda's social media profiles. According to her posts, she was thriving at Princeton, going to parties and joining elite societies. I felt a complex mix of emotions seeing her happiness, knowing it came at the expense of mine. 2 years after Jack's death, I graduated with my associate's degree in business management, top of my class. By then, I had streamlined the consulting business into a specialized practice, focusing on small businesses in financial distress, working with a network of freelancers Jack had introduced me to. The day after graduation, I received an email from Marlene Weber, the HR director at Core Brand Marketing, a mid-sized firm with a growing reputation in the Midwest. We had met at a business networking event where I had offered some suggestions for her company's approach to social media marketing. "We have an entry-level position opening in our analytics department," she wrote. "Your background is unusual, but I think you'd be a good fit for our culture. Are you interested in interviewing?" I was. The position offered stability, benefits including health insurance I desperately needed, and room for advancement. I prepared meticulously for the interview, researching everything about the company and practicing my responses to potential questions. My unusual path turned out to be an asset rather than a liability. The interviewer, a vice president named David Chen, was impressed by my resilience and self-taught skills. "Most applicants your age have textbook knowledge, but no real-world experience," he said. "You've actually saved businesses and built your own client base. That's remarkable." I started at Core Brand the following Monday, working longer hours than anyone else, and volunteering for projects others avoided. My experience with Jack's diverse clients gave me insights others lacked, allowing me to see connections and opportunities my colleagues missed. 4 months into the job, I was assigned to a struggling account on the verge of dropping our services. The client, a regional chain of outdoor equipment stores, was losing market share to online competitors. Drawing on what Jack had taught me about business transformation, I developed a comprehensive strategy that incorporated their physical stores as experience centers while building a more competitive online presence. I worked through weekends refining the approach, then asked David for 5 minutes to pitch my ideas. He gave me 30, and when I finished, he asked me to present to the client directly. The meeting was tense at first, the client skeptical of this young unknown facing them across the conference table. But as I walked them through the strategy, answering their pointed questions with confidence backed by research, their skepticism turned to interest. They approved a 3-month trial of my approach. When sales increased by 17% in the first quarter, I was promoted to account manager, the youngest in the company's history. My rise at Core Brand continued steadily over the next 3 years. I moved from account management to strategy development, building a reputation for innovative approaches to challenging problems. I started therapy again, this time with a private therapist I could afford with my new salary, working through the deeper issues my family abandonment had created. I bought a small condo in a renovated downtown building, my first real home since being kicked out. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I stood alone in the empty space, tears streaming down my face. I had done it. Despite everything, I had created stability and success on my own terms. Through industry networks, I occasionally heard rumors about my father's accounting firm. Consistent with what Jack had discovered, Richard Hamilton and Associates was under investigation by the State Licensing Board for ethical violations. I kept the information Jack had given me securely stored, never using it but finding some comfort in knowing the truth might eventually come to light without my involvement. In my 4th year at Core Brand, the company announced a major expansion, creating a new division focused on emerging digital markets. The director, Vanessa Torres, approached me directly. "We're building this team from the ground up," she explained. "I want you to manage the hiring process and help shape the department culture. You have an eye for potential others miss." It was a significant vote of confidence, effectively making me second in command of what would become the company's fastest-growing division. My first task was to review hundreds of resumes for various positions, from entry-level analysts to experienced digital strategists. Late one night, as I scrolled through applications on my laptop, a name jumped out at me: Amanda Hamilton. My sister. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Her resume showed she had left Princeton after 3 years without graduating. Since then, she had worked a series of retail jobs, none lasting more than 6 months. She was applying for an entry-level content creation position, one she was marginally qualified for at best. I closed my laptop, suddenly unable to breathe. 5 years had passed since that January day when my life had been upended. 5 years of struggle, growth, and rebuilding. And now, through some cosmic coincidence or twist of fate, my sister's future was literally in my hands. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and walked onto my small balcony, looking out at the city lights. What would Jack advise me to do? What was the right choice here, not just professionally but for my own healing? By morning, I had made my decision. I would interview her myself. The 3 years following Jack's death transformed me in ways I never could have predicted. While my career at Corebrand flourished, I worked equally hard on rebuilding my personal life and emotional health. My therapist, Dr. Reeves, helped me understand that my workaholic tendencies, while productive, were partly a defense mechanism. "You're afraid to slow down because then you might have to feel everything you've been outrunning," she observed during one particularly difficult session. She was right. I had substituted achievement for connection, using professional success to fill the void my family had left. Slowly, I began to open up, first to colleagues, then to actual friends. Marcus, a graphic designer from the creative department, became my first real friend at Corebrand after we were both stuck working late on a pitch presentation. We bonded over our shared love of obscure indie films and began meeting weekly for movie nights. Through Marcus, I met Elena, a literature professor at the local university who challenged my business-focused worldview with perspectives on philosophy and art. Our friendship evolved into a brief romance that, while ultimately not lasting, helped me realize I was capable of trust and vulnerability again. I built what therapists call a chosen family, people connected by choice rather than blood. We celebrated holidays together, supported each other through crises, and created new traditions that helped heal my association of family gatherings with pain and betrayal. My financial situation stabilized and then flourished. I invested carefully, remembering Jack's lessons about the importance of diversification and long-term thinking. By 24, I had fully paid off my student loans from community college and established a healthy retirement account. Occasionally, I would look up my parents on social media, not out of a desire to reconnect, but simply to know what was happening in their lives. What I discovered surprised me. My father's accounting firm had indeed faced consequences for their ethical lapses. Several clients had filed complaints about improper practices, leading to an investigation by the state board. While he avoided criminal charges, his professional reputation was severely damaged. They had sold their house in the suburbs, moving to a much smaller condo outside the city. Amanda's social media told a different story than the carefree college experience her early posts suggested. Reading between the lines of her increasingly infrequent updates, I gathered that Princeton had not been the dream experience my parents had sacrificed my future for. Her posts about academic excitement gave way to photos at parties, then vague references to taking a break and finding herself. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, just a hollow sadness for what could have been if they had made different choices. In therapy, I worked through my lingering anger, coming to understand that their treatment of me reflected their own fears and limitations more than any failure on my part. Favoritism like your parents showed is often about the parents' needs, not the children's qualities, Dr. Reeves explained. They likely projected their own unfulfilled ambitions onto your sister. This insight helped me separate my self-worth from their rejection. I was not unworthy of love or support. They had been incapable of providing it equally and unconditionally. My promotion to hiring manager for the new digital division came as Corebrand was undergoing significant expansion. The company had recently acquired 2 smaller agencies, absorbing their clients and some of their talent. My role gave me considerable influence in shaping the culture and capabilities of what would become the company's most profitable department. I approached hiring with principles Jack would have approved of, looking beyond traditional credentials to identify people with drive, adaptability, and unique perspectives. Under my guidance, We built a diverse team that quickly developed a reputation for innovative campaigns that drove measurable results for clients. Vanessa Torres, my director, gave me increasing autonomy as my decisions repeatedly proved sound. "You have an instinct for people," she told me after one particularly successful hire, a former teacher who brought fresh approaches to our educational client accounts. "You see potential where others see gaps." The irony of this statement wasn't lost on me, given how thoroughly my own potential had been dismissed by those who should have nurtured it. Perhaps that experience had given me a sharper eye for overlooked talent. The night I discovered Amanda's application, I barely slept. 1,000 scenarios played through my mind, from vindictive rejection to tearful reconciliation. By morning, professional ethics won out over personal history. I would interview her fairly, judging her qualifications against the position requirements just as I would any other candidate. But first, I did something I couldn't help. I researched her more thoroughly. Through industry contacts and social networks, I pieced together a more complete picture of what had happened in the 5 years since I'd seen her. Amanda had indeed attended Princeton for nearly 3 years on the partial scholarship and my repurposed college fund. But according to a former classmate now working at Corbrand's New York office, she had struggled academically and socially, the pressure of being a first-generation Ivy League student from a middle-class background taking its toll. She had left without graduating, moving back to Ohio where our parents were now facing financial difficulties following the collapse of my father's business. She had worked retail jobs at the mall, then as an administrative assistant at a local marketing agency, too small to provide advancement opportunities. The more I learned, the more complex my feelings became. The sister I had envied and resented had not received the golden future my parents had promised. The sacrifice they had forced me to make had been in vain. The morning of the interview, I arrived at the office an hour early, reviewing her application one more time. On paper, she wasn't the strongest candidate, lacking the degree and specific experience we typically required. But there was potential in her writing samples, a natural understanding of what resonated with different audiences. I arranged the meeting room carefully, removing personal items that might identify me before she arrived. Part of me wondered if she would even recognize me. 5 years had changed me from a sick, desperate teenager to a polished professional. I wore a tailored suit, kept my hair neatly styled, and had developed the confident posture of someone comfortable in corporate settings. As the minutes ticked down to our scheduled meeting, I received an unexpected email from an address I didn't recognize. amandahamilton94@gmail.com. The message was brief but shook me to my core. "Dear Mr. Stephen Walker, I just realized from the company directory that you're the Stephen Walker who will be interviewing me today. If you're who I think you are, I want you to know I had no idea you worked at Corbrand when I applied. This is not some attempt to reconnect. I genuinely need this job. I also want you to know that I only recently learned the truth about what happened 5 years ago. I'm sorry for everything, but I'll understand if you recuse yourself from the interview process. Amanda Hamilton." I sat at my desk, staring at the message, my carefully planned professional approach suddenly complicated by this direct acknowledgement. She knew, and more importantly, her words suggested she hadn't known the truth before. I had 10 minutes to decide how to proceed. In the end, I chose the path that would allow me to maintain my professional integrity while still facing this pivotal moment in my personal history. I responded simply, "The interview will proceed as scheduled. Please check in with reception at 11 a.m. Then I walked to the meeting room to wait for my sister. The night before Amanda's interview, after receiving her email, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions. What truth had she recently learned? How much did she know about what had happened? What did she think of our parents now? I rose before dawn, standing under the shower until the hot water ran cold, trying to clear my head. This wasn't just about Amanda or potential reconciliation. How I handled today would reflect on my professional reputation at Corbrand, the company that had given me a chance when I had nothing. I dressed meticulously in my best suit, a dark blue canali I'd purchased to celebrate my last promotion. The routine of knotting my tie and polishing my shoes helped steady my nerves. In my home office, I reviewed her application one final time, forcing myself to see it through an objective lens. Amanda had completed 3 years at Princeton, majoring in communications before withdrawing. Her work experience consisted of retail positions and 18 months at Small Town Marketing, a local agency where she'd started as a receptionist and been promoted to junior copywriter. Her portfolio showed promise but lacked the technical skills and strategic thinking our position required. Under normal circumstances, she wouldn't make it past the first interview. But these weren't normal circumstances. I arrived at the office 2 hours early, needing time to center myself. The familiar environment of Corebrand calmed me. This was my territory now, the world I had built for myself after everything had been taken away. Vanessa stopped by my office around 9, surprised to find me already deep in work. "You're interviewing Amanda Hamilton today, right?" she asked, leaning against my doorframe. "Anything about her application that's particularly impressive?" I kept my expression neutral. Some natural talent for audience engagement, but limited technical experience. "I'm keeping an open mind." She nodded. "That's why you're good at this. You see potential others miss." She checked her watch. "I have meetings all morning, but let me know if you find any standouts." I spent the next hour preparing the interview room, a small conference space with glass walls that offered privacy while remaining visible to the rest of the office. I removed my nameplate from the door and positioned the chair so that Amanda would enter before getting a clear view of my face. At 10:30, I retreated to my office, closing the door for a moment of quiet reflection. On my desk sat a small stone paperweight Jack had given me, a smooth river rock with the word "persist" engraved on its surface. I held it in my palm, drawing strength from the connection to the man who had saved me when my own family had failed. "What would you do, Jack?" I whispered. The answer came clearly in my mind, almost as if he were standing beside me. He would expect me to be professional but honest, to protect myself without seeking revenge, to remember that healing sometimes comes from unexpected places. I placed the stone back on my desk and pulled out a legal pad, jotting down the standard questions I asked all candidates, along with a few specific ones for Amanda based on her experience. I would conduct this interview by the book, giving her the fair chance I hadn't received. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Lunch after your interviews? Elena's in town." I replied with a quick, "Maybe," unable to commit when I had no idea what state I'd be in after facing Amanda. At 10:55, my assistant Maya knocked on my door. "Your 11 o'clock candidate is here," reception called up. "Thank you. I'll be right there." I took a deep breath, straightening my tie one last time. 5 years of building a new life had led to this moment. Whatever happened in that interview room would be on my terms, not driven by the abandonment and betrayal that had defined our last interaction. I gathered my notebook, Amanda's resume, and a pen, presenting the image of confident professionalism I had worked so hard to create. No one looking at me would see the homeless, sick teenager who had once slept in a shelter, wondering if life was worth continuing. Walking to the elevator, I thought about the email Amanda had sent. I only recently learned the truth she had written. What version of events had she believed all these years? Had she been fed the same lies about drug addiction that my parents had told the rest of the family? The elevator doors opened on the reception floor. Through the glass doors of the waiting area, I could see a young woman sitting rigidly in one of the visitor chairs, clutching a portfolio case. Her hair was darker than I remembered, cut in a professional bob instead of the long waves she'd worn as a teenager. She was thinner, her face showing stress lines that hadn't been there at 16. For a moment, seeing her triggered a flood of memories: birthday parties where her cake was bigger, school events where she received standing ovations while my achievements went unmentioned, the last glimpse of her watching from her bedroom doorway as I carried my life out in boxes. I pushed the memories away. Today wasn't about the past. It was about demonstrating who I had become despite everything that had been done to me. I nodded to the receptionist and stepped into the waiting area. Amanda looked up, her eyes widening with recognition. "Miss Hamilton?" I said formally, extending my hand. "I'm Stephen Walker. Please follow me to the interview room." Her hand trembled slightly as she shook mine, but she maintained eye contact, something I hadn't expected. The sister I remembered had always looked away when confronted. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. I led her to the elevator in silence, acutely aware of the receptionist watching us curiously. We stood side by side, not speaking as the floors ticked by. I could sense her stealing glances at me, taking in the changes 5 years had wrought. When we reached the interview room, I gestured for her to take a seat across from me at the small table. I placed her resume between us, a document that represented the divergent paths our lives had taken since our parents had chosen her future over mine. She set her portfolio on the table, her knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. Despite her professional attire, a simple navy dress with a blazer, she looked young and vulnerable. I clicked my pen, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "We are here to discuss your qualifications for the content specialist position," I said, my voice calm and controlled. "Shall we begin?" Amanda nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, I'm ready." I started with standard questions, maintaining a professional demeanor while she described her experience and skills. Her voice gained confidence as she spoke about projects she'd worked on at small-town marketing, showing genuine enthusiasm for creative content development. Under different circumstances, I might have been impressed by her articulate responses and clear passion for the work, but I couldn't separate the professional candidate from the sister whose future had been purchased with my suffering. Halfway through the interview, during a question about her greatest professional challenge, her composure cracked. "I'm sorry," she interrupted herself mid-sentence. "I can't do this. Not like this." She set down her pen and looked directly at me. "Stephen, it's been 5 years. Can we please acknowledge what happened?" I carefully placed my own pen on the table. "This is a professional setting, Miss Hamilton. I'm evaluating your qualifications for a position at Corebrand." "I know," she said, her voice dropping, "and I appreciate the opportunity. But I also know you must have questions." "I certainly do." The controlled environment I'd carefully constructed was crumbling. Part of me wanted to maintain the professional facade, to deny her the emotional conversation she clearly wanted. But another part, the part that had spent years in therapy working through abandonment and betrayal, needed answers. I checked my watch. "We have 15 minutes remaining in this interview slot. After that, I have a lunch meeting." It wasn't true, but it gave me an escape route if needed. "Then I'll be brief," she said. "First, I want you to know that I didn't know what Mom and Dad did to you until last year. They told me you left because you were angry about my Princeton acceptance, that you cut contact with all of us voluntarily." I kept my face neutral, though her words confirmed my suspicions. "Continue." "I believed them," she admitted, her eyes filling with tears she visibly fought to control. "I was hurt and confused, but I was also 17 and self-centered. Princeton was my dream, and I didn't question how we could suddenly afford it." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table. "What's this?" I asked, not touching it. "A bank statement. From my college fund. I found it last year when I was helping Mom organize their financial documents after Dad's firm collapsed." Her voice hardened. "That's when I saw the transfers from your account to mine. That's when I started asking questions they couldn't answer." I hesitated, then unfolded the paper. There it was in black and white. Regular transfers from S. Walker College Fund to A. Hamilton College Fund, dating back to when I was 16. "I confronted them," Amanda continued. "Dad got angry. Mom finally broke down and told me everything. How they'd chosen me over you. How they'd thrown you out when you were sick. How they'd lied to everyone about why you left." A tear escaped despite her efforts. "I've been trying to find you ever since, but you changed your number, moved away. None of your old friends knew where you were." I refolded the statement, my hands steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "And now you've found me through a job application." "Complete coincidence," she insisted. "I had no idea you worked here until I saw your name on the interview schedule yesterday. I almost withdrew my application, but She hesitated. "I've wanted to apologize for a year now." "Apologize," I repeated flatly. "For what exactly?" "You were a child. Our parents made the decisions. For believing them without question. For enjoying Princeton while you were." She couldn't finish the sentence. "While I was homeless? Sick? Abandoned?" The words came out sharper than I intended. 5 years of therapy hadn't completely healed some wounds. "Yes," she whispered. "If I had known, I would have done something. I would have helped you." I studied my sister's face, searching for the entitlement and selfishness I had attributed to her for years. Instead, I saw genuine regret and something else, a hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Life had clearly taught her some difficult lessons, too. "What happened with Princeton?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my resolve to keep the conversation professional. "Your resume shows you left after 3 years." Amanda's posture slumped slightly. I crashed and burned. The pressure was overwhelming. Dad had built me up as this academic prodigy, but I was just a good student from Ohio, suddenly surrounded by people who had been groomed for the Ivy League since birth. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture so familiar it sent a pang through me. My grades slipped. I got depressed. When I called home for support, Dad just kept saying I couldn't fail, that they had sacrificed everything for me to be there. Her laugh was bitter. I didn't understand what he meant then. "And now I know they sacrificed you." She met my eyes directly. "I dropped out after junior year. Couldn't handle it anymore. When I came home, everything was falling apart. Dad's firm was under investigation. They were selling the house. And suddenly I was the disappointment instead of the golden child." The timer on my phone chimed, indicating our scheduled interview time had ended. I silenced it but didn't move to stand. "What do you want from me, Amanda?" I asked quietly. "Beyond this job interview? Nothing you don't want to give," she said. "A chance, maybe. To know my brother again. To try to make amends, even though I know that's probably impossible." I looked at her resume on the table between us, thinking about the parallel tracks our lives had taken. My parents had gambled everything on her success and discarded me in the process. Now she sat before me, their plan in ruins, while I had built something meaningful from the ashes of their betrayal. "The position," I said finally. "You're not qualified for it. Your technical skills don't meet our requirements, and your experience is too limited." Her face fell, but she nodded. "I understand. Thank you for being professional enough to interview me anyway." I gathered my notes. "However, there is an entry-level position opening in our content support team next month. It's more administrative than creative initially, but it provides training in our systems and methodologies. After 6 months, strong performers can apply for advancement to the creative team." Her eyes widened with surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting you apply when the posting goes live. If you do, I'll make sure your application receives fair consideration." I stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "That's all I can offer professionally right now." Amanda gathered her portfolio, clearly processing my words. "And personally?" I hesitated, conflicting emotions warring within me. "Personally, I think we both have a lot to process. I'm willing to talk, but I need time." "I understand," she said, standing and extending her hand formally. "Thank you, Stephen, for the interview and for not hating me immediately." I shook her hand. "I don't hate you, Amanda. I never did. Our parents made choices that hurt us both, just in different ways." As we walked back to the reception area, a professional distance between us, I made a decision. I usually have coffee at River City Cafe on Saturdays around 10. "If you wanted to continue this conversation outside of work," the hope in her eyes was almost painful to see. "I'd like that, very much." At the elevator, I handed her my business card. "Send your updated resume when the content support position posts." And I paused, then added, "It was unexpected seeing you today, but not entirely unwelcome." She nodded, tears threatening again. "Thank you, Stephen." I watched her enter the elevator, maintaining my professional composure until the doors closed. Then I retreated to my office, closing the door and taking a moment to process the emotional whirlwind of the past hour. That Saturday, I arrived at the cafe early, securing a quiet table in the corner. I wasn't entirely sure she would come, or what I would say if she did, but at precisely 10 o'clock, Amanda walked through the door, scanning the room until she spotted me. Our conversation that morning lasted for hours, painful and healing by turns. She told me about our parents' downfall, how my father's ethical shortcuts had finally caught up with him, leading to the loss of major clients and eventually his license to practice. They had lost their house, their social standing, and most of their friends. "They never talk about you," she said. "It's like they erased you from our family history." When I confronted them with what I'd found, Dad got angry, but Mom just cried for days. I think she's always known what they did was unforgivable. I shared parts of my journey: the homelessness, meeting Jack, rebuilding my life piece by piece. I was selective, protecting the most vulnerable aspects of my experience, while giving her enough to understand what I had overcome. By the time we parted that afternoon, something had shifted. The wall of hurt and misunderstanding between us hadn't disappeared, but a small window had opened, allowing the possibility of a new kind of relationship, not based on our shared past, but on who we were becoming. Amanda did apply for the content support position when it opened, and her interview with the team leader went well. She started at CoreBrand a month later, working in a different department from mine to maintain professional boundaries. I watched from a distance as she threw herself into the role, arriving early, staying late, and soaking up every learning opportunity. The enthusiasm I had glimpsed during our interview blossomed as she found her footing. Within 3 months, her team leader was sending me emails praising her work ethic and quick learning. We continued our Saturday coffee meetings, gradually rebuilding a sibling relationship neither of us had truly experienced before. Amanda had been the golden child, me the overlooked one, both of us pawns in our parents' dysfunctional value system. Now we were just two adults finding common ground and genuine connection. 6 months after Amanda joined CoreBrand, I visited Jack's grave on the anniversary of his death. The simple headstone read Jackson Parker, 1945 to 2020. He built bridges. I had chosen the inscription myself, thinking of how he had bridged the darkest time in my life, connecting me to a future I couldn't see from the depths of my despair. I placed a small stone on top of the headstone, a Jewish tradition I had learned from one of Jack's oldest friends who had attended the funeral. I kept my promise, I told him, feeling only slightly self-conscious about speaking aloud. I'm building something good, not just at work but in my life. That evening, I finalized the paperwork for the Stephen Walker Second Chance Scholarship at the community college I had attended. Funded through my savings and designed for students facing family estrangement or unexpected homelessness, it would provide not just tuition but emergency housing assistance and mentorship. The first recipient would start classes in January. I had insisted on being part of the selection committee, knowing from experience that official documents rarely told the full story of someone's potential and determination. As for my parents, I still had no contact with them. Amanda occasionally mentioned them in our conversations, usually in passing. They were struggling financially, their retirement plans shattered by my father's professional disgrace. Part of me felt they had received the karma they deserved, but a more evolved part recognized that continuing to define my life in relation to their failures only gave them continued power over me. My therapist had asked once if I could ever forgive them. I wasn't sure forgiveness was possible or even necessary for my healing. What I had found instead was perspective, the understanding that their treatment of me reflected their own brokenness rather than my worth. I had built a life they had never imagined possible for me, surrounding myself with people who valued my contributions and my character. Jack had seen my potential when my own parents couldn't or wouldn't. Now I strive to honor his faith in me by extending that same recognition to others, including, cautiously, my sister. The story of my life wasn't defined by being kicked out at 19. It was defined by what I had built since then. A career, friendships, purpose, and now, the beginning of a healed relationship with Amanda. The painful chapters hadn't disappeared, but they no longer comprised the whole narrative. If you've ever faced betrayal by those who should have protected you, know that their failure doesn't determine your worth. Your future isn't limited by their inability to see your potential. Building a life on your own terms is both possible and deeply rewarding. Have you ever had to rebuild after a profound betrayal? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to the channel for more content about overcoming adversity and finding your path. Share with someone who might need to hear that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who believe in you when no one else does. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the strength to persist through your own challenges and emerge stronger on the other side.